The machine beeped steadily beside my hospital bed as I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the tiny holes in each square for the 100th time that week. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. They said 6 months, maybe 8 if I was lucky. But as I lay there with poison flowing through my veins, calling it chemotherapy to make it sound hopeful, I had no idea that my salvation was waiting for me in a cold concrete kennel just 15 miles away. His name was Benny, and he was dying too. While I was learning to navigate the world of insurance claims and treatment schedules, he was learning that humans weren't always kind, that food wasn't always coming, and that sometimes the people who were supposed to love you just didn't. Neither of us knew that in 3 days, we would find each other in the most unexpected place, and that our broken pieces would somehow fit together to create something beautiful. Speech balloon, I'd love to know. What time is it where you are right now, and which city or state are you watching from? Let me take you back to where this story really begins. My name is Sarah, and I was 32 years old when my world crumbled on a Tuesday morning in October. I had been living what I thought was a perfectly normal life in Denver, Colorado. I worked as a graphic designer for a small marketing firm, spent my weekends hiking in the Rockies, and had just signed a lease on a cute apartment in the Arts District that I thought would be my home for years to come. The stomach pain started small. Just a dull ache after meals that I blamed on stress from a big project at work. When it didn't go away after 2 weeks, I made an appointment with my doctor, expecting to walk out with antacids and advice to eat more fiber. Instead, I walked out with a referral to an oncologist and a growing knot of fear in my chest that felt heavier than the physical pain in my abdomen. Dr. Martinez was kind but direct when he delivered the news that would split my life into before and after. Pancreatic cancer. Advanced stage. The words bounced off me like raindrops on glass at first. Surely there was some mistake. I was young, healthy, had never smoked, barely drank. Cancer happened to other people, older people, people who had lived longer and fuller lives than mine. But the scans didn't lie. The tumor markers didn't lie. The biopsy results that came back 3 days later didn't lie. I had cancer, the kind that kills people, the kind that doesn't care about your age or your plans or the dreams you haven't achieved yet. The next few weeks blurred together in a haze of medical appointments and insurance calls. I had to quit my job because the chemotherapy schedule was too demanding. I had to break my lease because I couldn't afford rent without steady income. I had to call my parents in Ohio and tell them their youngest daughter was sick, really sick, and watch their faces crumble through the pixelated connection of a video call. My world became very small very quickly. The oncology ward at Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital became more familiar than my own living room. The schedule of blood draws and infusions became more important than any social calendar I had ever kept. The side effects of treatment became the weather that determined what kind of day I could have. The nausea was relentless. Food tasted like metal when I could keep it down at all. My hair started falling out in clumps during my 2nd week of treatment, and I spent an afternoon crying in the bathroom as I watched brown strands swirl down the drain like autumn leaves. The fatigue was unlike anything I had ever experienced, not just tired, but hollowed out, as if someone had scooped away pieces of my soul and left empty spaces behind. But it was the loneliness that nearly broke me. My friends meant well, but they didn't know what to say to someone whose future had suddenly become measured in months instead of decades. They brought flowers and casseroles and cheerful conversation that felt forced and exhausting. Family visited when they could, but they lived too far away to be part of the daily reality of living with cancer. I spent a lot of time alone in that apartment I could barely afford, watching the seasons change outside my window and wondering what the point of fighting was if I was just going to end up fighting alone. That's when the idea first whispered itself into my consciousness, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. My grandmother had always said that when you're drowning in your own problems, Sometimes the only way to save yourself is to save someone else first. She had volunteered at animal shelters her entire adult life, fostering dogs and cats who needed temporary homes while they recovered from surgery or searched for permanent families. When I was little, she would tell me stories about the animals she had helped, how giving them love had somehow given her more love than she started with. Maybe, I thought during one particularly dark evening in November, maybe I needed to find someone who needed me more than I needed to feel sorry for myself. The Denver Animal Shelter was busier than I had expected for a Wednesday afternoon. Families with excited children moved through the adoption areas, their voices echoing off the concrete walls as they debated between golden retrievers and beagles. Volunteers in bright purple vests moved efficiently between kennels, filling water bowls and dispensing treats and comfort with equal measure. I had come looking for a cat, something small and quiet that could curl up with me during the long days between treatments. Something that wouldn't require too much energy or attention when the chemotherapy left me weak and nauseous. I had already visited the cat rooms and found several sweet candidates, but something was pulling me toward the dog kennels. Maybe it was the sound of desperate barking echoing from that direction. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was just procrastination, putting off the decision I had come here to make. But I found myself walking away from the calm cat rooms toward the more chaotic energy of the dog adoption area. The large dog section was exactly what I had expected. Pit bulls with blockhead grins throwing themselves against kennel doors. Labrador mixes spinning in circles with excitement. German shepherds standing alert and hopeful, their intelligent eyes tracking every potential adopter who passed by their enclosures. But as I walked deeper into the facility, toward the back where the lighting was dimmer and the foot traffic was lighter, the energy changed. These were the animals who had been here longer, the ones with sadder stories, the ones who had learned not to get their hopes up every time footsteps approached their kennels. The medical wing was separated from the main adoption area by a heavy door marked "Staff Only, Animals Under Medical Care." I shouldn't have been able to go back there, but a volunteer was bringing a carrier through the door just as I walked past, and I caught a glimpse of what lay beyond. The kennels here were smaller, equipped with heating pads and special bedding. The animals were quieter, some sleeping deeply under the influence of pain medication, others sitting alert but clearly unwell. These were the rescues who needed more than just love and good homes. They needed medical care, specialized diets, medications, and the kind of patience that not every adopter was prepared to give. That's where I saw him. Kennel number 47 held what looked like a small German Shepherd mix, maybe 4 or 5 months old, but so thin that his breed was hard to determine. His ribs showed clearly through his dull coat, and his hip bones jutted out like mountain peaks under sparse fur. But it was his eyes that stopped me dead in my tracks. They were the eyes of someone much older than his puppy body suggested. Dark brown, almost black, and filled with a weariness that no baby animal should ever carry. He was lying on his side on a thick blanket, not moving except for the barely perceptible rise and fall of his breathing. A nameplate on his kennel read Benny, approximate. 5 months, severe malnutrition and parasites, medical hold pending evaluation. I knelt down in front of his enclosure, pressing my palms against the cold metal mesh. Benny's ears twitched at the sound of my movement, but he didn't lift his head. He had learned, somehow, that getting excited about visitors only led to disappointment. "Hey there, buddy," I whispered, and this time his eyes opened fully, focusing on my face with an intensity that took my breath away. In that moment, looking into those ancient puppy eyes, I saw myself reflected back. The exhaustion, the weariness, the bone-deep knowledge that your body was betraying you, and there wasn't much you could do about it except endure and hope for better days ahead. A shelter volunteer appeared at my shoulder, her purple vest bright against the muted colors of the medical wing. She was older, maybe 50, with gentle hands and eyes that had clearly seen too many animals who needed more help than the world was prepared to give. "That's Benny," she said softly, following my gaze to the small figure in kennel 47. "He came to us about 3 weeks ago. Animal control found him chained to a tree behind an abandoned house on the east side of town. He'd been there for at least a week, maybe longer, with no food or water." Her voice caught slightly as she continued. "The family that lived there had been evicted, and they just left him. The neighbors said they heard him crying for days before someone finally called it in." I pressed my fingers against the kennel mesh, wishing I could reach through and touch him. "What's wrong with him now?" "Physically, he's suffering from severe malnutrition and several types of intestinal parasites. We've been treating him for 3 weeks, and he's gained about 2 pounds, but he's got a long way to go. The vet thinks he'll make a full recovery with time and proper care, but it's going to be a slow process." She paused, studying my face. "But honestly, the bigger concern is emotional. He doesn't trust people anymore. Won't play. Barely interacts with our volunteers. It's like he's given up on the idea that humans might be good for anything except disappointment." "What happens to him if no one adopts him?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. The volunteer's expression grew more serious. "We're a no-kill shelter, so he's not in immediate danger. But animals with his level of medical and emotional needs, they're harder to place. Most families want healthy, happy puppies. Benny is going to need someone very special, someone who understands that love isn't always enough. He needs patience, consistency, probably ongoing medical care." I looked back at Benny, and for just a moment, his eyes met mine directly. There was something in that gaze, not hope exactly, but a flicker of curiosity, as if he was wondering if I might be different from all the other humans who had looked at him and walked away. "Can I spend some time with him?" I asked, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. The volunteer's face brightened immediately. "Of course, but I should warn you, he's not very interactive right now. He mostly just sleeps, and you'll need to be very gentle. He's still quite fragile." She led me to a small visiting room that smelled of disinfectant and hope. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow, but the concrete floor and fluorescent lighting reminded you that this was still an institutional setting. A few toys were scattered in one corner, though they looked like they hadn't been played with in quite some time. The volunteer returned a few minutes later carrying Benny in her arms like a precious, fragile package. He was even smaller than he had looked in the kennel, his thin body almost lost in her embrace. She set him down gently on the floor and handed me his leash, though it was clear he had no intention of going anywhere energetically. "Take your time," she said with a warm smile. "I'll be right outside if you need anything." And then it was just Benny and me, 2 creatures marked by circumstances beyond our control, sitting in a small room that represented possibility and uncertainty in equal measure. Benny stood where she had placed him for a long moment, his legs slightly unsteady. His fur was coarser than I had expected, and I could see the bare patches where malnutrition had caused hair loss. But he was alive, breathing, present in a way that felt miraculous given what he had endured. I settled onto the cold floor, not wanting to tower over him or make any movements that might seem threatening. My chemotherapy-weakened joints protested the hard surface, but something about being at his level felt important. Slowly, carefully, Benny took a step toward me, then another. His movements were deliberate, cautious, as if he was constantly calculating whether I might suddenly turn dangerous. When he was close enough, he stopped and simply looked at me, his dark eyes searching my face for clues about what kind of human I might be. "I've been sick too," I told him quietly, reaching out slowly to let him sniff my fingers. "I know what it feels like when your body doesn't work the way it's supposed to. I know what it feels like to be scared that tomorrow might be worse than today." Something in my voice seemed to resonate with him. His tail gave the smallest wag. Barely more than a twitch, but unmistakably hopeful. Then, moving with careful deliberation, he walked the remaining distance between us and leaned against my leg. The weight of him was solid and warm, and more comforting than I had expected. For the first time in weeks, my mind wasn't racing with thoughts of treatment schedules and prognosis discussions, and the growing list of things I might never get to do. There was just this moment, this small creature trusting me enough to rest against me, choosing connection over the safety of isolation. I reached out slowly and touched his head, my fingers finding the soft spots behind his ears. His fur was thin but clean, and I could feel every ridge of his skull, every delicate bone that malnutrition had left too close to the surface. But his tail wagged again, more confidently this time, and I felt something inside my chest loosen for the first time since my diagnosis. We sat like that for nearly an hour, not moving much, not trying to force interaction or excitement. Sometimes Benny would shift position, moving from leaning against my leg to curling up with his head resting on my ankle. Once he fell asleep, his small body completely relaxed in a way that the volunteer later told me she hadn't seen since his arrival at the shelter. When I finally knew I had to leave, my next medical appointment was approaching, and I needed time to mentally prepare for another round of blood draws and consultations. I found myself reluctant to disturb him, but as soon as I started to move, Benny's eyes opened, alert and focused on my face. "I have to go for now, buddy," I told him, scratching behind his ears one more time. "But I'm going to think about you, okay? I'm going to think about both of us getting better." The volunteer was waiting outside the visiting room with barely contained excitement. "How did it go?" she asked, though I think she could already tell from my expression. "I want to adopt him," I said without hesitation. "Whatever he needs, whatever it costs, whatever it takes. We need each other." Her face lit up with genuine joy, but then grew serious again. "I have to be completely honest with you about what you'd be taking on. Benny's medical care is going to be expensive and ongoing. Special diet, medications, regular vet visits to monitor his progress. There's no guarantee how long his recovery will take, or if he'll ever be completely normal." I almost laughed at the irony. "Normal," I said, thinking of my own uncertain prognosis and the pills lined up on my kitchen counter and the calendar marked with treatment appointments. "I think normal is overrated. What I need is someone who understands that getting better is a process, not a destination." The adoption process took 4 days to complete. 4 days of paperwork and reference checks, and home visits and medical consultations. 4 days of calling the shelter twice each day to check on Benny's condition and make sure he knew I was coming back for him. During those 4 days, I prepared my apartment for a new roommate who would need patience, gentleness, and probably around-the-clock care for the foreseeable future. I researched veterinary clinics that specialized in nutritional recovery. I bought food specifically formulated for dogs with sensitive digestive systems. I moved my favorite reading chair closer to the window, so Benny would have a sunny spot to rest while he regained his strength. But most importantly, I prepared myself emotionally for the reality of caring for another living being while fighting my own battle with illness. There would be days when I felt too sick to walk him properly, times when my own medical appointments would conflict with his needs. I made arrangements with my neighbor, Mrs. Chun, to serve as backup support when chemotherapy left me too weak to provide proper care. When she heard about Benny, Mrs. Chun had tears in her eyes. "Oh, sweetie," she said, pulling me into one of her warm hugs. "That little dog doesn't know how lucky he is. You're going to save each other." On Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after I had first met Benny, I drove back to the shelter to bring him home. My hands were shaking with nervous excitement as I walked through the familiar corridors toward the medical wing. What if he didn't remember me? What if he had bonded with one of the volunteers instead? What if I was making a terrible mistake, taking on the responsibility of a sick puppy when I could barely take care of myself? But when I rounded the corner to Kennel 47, Benny was sitting up, alert and watching the entrance as if he had been waiting for me. When he saw me, his tail began to wag. Not the tentative twitch from our first meeting, but a real, enthusiastic puppy wag that made his whole back end wiggle with excitement. The same volunteer who had first introduced us was beaming as she opened his kennel door. "He's been different all week," she told me. "More alert, more responsive to people. It's like he knew you were coming back for him." Benny walked directly to me and sat down at my feet, looking up at me with those dark eyes that no longer seemed quite so resigned. His tail continued wagging as I clipped the new collar and leash I had bought specifically for him. And for the first time since my diagnosis, I felt a surge of pure, uncomplicated joy. The drive home was quiet and careful. Benny rode in a small carrier in the passenger seat, occasionally making soft whimpering sounds that seemed more curious than distressed. I talked to him the entire way, describing the apartment he was going to live in, the park across the street where we would take gentle walks, the sunny spot by the window where he could watch the world go by while he recovered. When we arrived at my building, I carried his carrier up the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, my heart pounding from the exertion, but also from anticipation. I had prepared a small area in my living room with his bed, food and water bowls, and a few toys arranged invitingly on a soft blanket. I set the carrier down and opened the door, then sat back to let Benny explore at his own pace. He emerged slowly, sniffing cautiously at the unfamiliar surroundings. The apartment suddenly seemed huge through his eyes. All this space just for him, after weeks in a small kennel with barely enough room to turn around. He investigated his food bowl first, his tail wagging when he discovered it contained the special puppy food the vet had recommended for his sensitive digestive system. Then he found his bed, a soft, round cushion that I had placed in the warmest corner of the room. He circled it 3 times before settling down with a contented sigh that seemed to say, "Finally, home." I settled into my reading chair nearby, not wanting to overwhelm him, but also not wanting to leave him alone on his first day in a new place. As the afternoon light streamed through the window, casting golden patterns on the hardwood floor, Benny dozed peacefully in his new bed while I watched and marveled at the strange turn my life had taken. 6 months ago, I had been a healthy 32-year-old woman with a career and plans and a future that stretched out indefinitely ahead of me. Now I was a cancer patient with an uncertain prognosis and a malnourished puppy, and somehow this felt more right than anything had in months. But the real journey was just beginning. Benny's first few weeks with me were a delicate dance of healing and learning to trust. His medical issues meant he needed to eat small amounts of food several times throughout the day, and his medications had to be given at precise intervals. Some days he felt energetic enough for short walks around the block. Other days, he barely lifted his head from his bed. I quickly discovered that our illnesses had created a strange sort of synchronicity. On the days when I felt well enough to be active, Benny often had more energy too. On the days when my chemotherapy treatments left me exhausted and nauseous, Benny seemed to sense my need for quiet companionship and would spend hours simply lying beside me, his warm presence more comforting than any medication. Mrs. Chun became our unofficial support system, checking on both of us during my treatment days and taking Benny for walks when I was too weak to manage it myself. She had a way with him that was both gentle and practical, and Benny quickly learned to trust her almost as much as he trusted me. It was during our 4th week together that Benny and I experienced our first real crisis. I had been feeling particularly good for several days. The kind of false energy burst that sometimes comes between chemotherapy cycles, and I had perhaps pushed both of us a little too hard. We had taken longer walks, played more actively, and I had been less careful about monitoring his food intake and medication schedule. On a Tuesday night, Benny woke me up with sharp whimpering sounds that cut through my sleep like alarm bells. When I turned on the light, I found him curled in a tight ball in his bed, his small body trembling with pain. His breathing was rapid and shallow, and when I tried to coax him to drink some water, he couldn't keep it down. The emergency veterinary clinic was a blur of bright lights and worried faces and medical smells that reminded me too much of my own recent experiences with crisis care. Benny was so small and still in my arms as we waited for the doctor, and I found myself making the same desperate bargains with God that I had made during my own medical emergencies. "Please," I whispered into his soft fur. "Please let him be okay. Whatever you want from me, just let him be okay." Dr. Rodriguez, the emergency vet, was kind but direct in the way that medical professionals learn to be when delivering difficult news. Benny was experiencing a severe flare-up of his digestive issues, complicated by what appeared to be a reaction to something he had eaten. His system was more fragile than we had realized, and he was going to need several days of intensive care to stabilize. "Can I stay with him?" I asked, though I knew the answer before she shook her head. "I'm sorry, but we need to keep him in our ICU where we can monitor him closely. You can call for updates every few hours, and hopefully you'll be able to visit tomorrow if his condition improves." Leaving Benny at the emergency clinic was one of the hardest things I had ever done. He looked so small and vulnerable on the examination table, for lines and monitors making him seem even more fragile than when I had first found him at the shelter. When I leaned down to kiss the top of his head goodbye, he looked at me with those dark eyes, and I could swear he was trying to tell me something important. "Don't give up on me," his eyes seemed to say. "I'm not giving up on you either." The next 3 days were agony. I called the clinic every few hours for updates, pacing my apartment and jumping every time the phone rang. Benny was stable, but not improving as quickly as the doctors had hoped. His body was fighting the infection, but he was so weak from months of malnutrition before I found him that his recovery was slow and uncertain. On the second night, Dr. Rodriguez called with an update that made my heart stop completely. "His condition has stabilized," she said carefully, "but I need to be completely honest with you about something. Benny's system is more compromised than we initially realized. Even with aggressive treatment, he's going to need very specialized care for the rest of his life. Special diet, regular monitoring, medications that will be expensive and ongoing. Some people in your situation might consider." "No," I said firmly, cutting her off before she could finish that sentence. "Whatever he needs, we'll figure it out. He doesn't give up on me, and I don't give up on him. Period." There was a pause, and when Dr. Rodriguez spoke again, her voice was softer, warmer. "You know, in 20 years of veterinary medicine, I've learned that the animals who fight the hardest are usually the ones who have something very special to fight for. Benny is very lucky to have found you." "Lucky," I thought as I hung up the phone and stared out at the city lights twinkling below my apartment window. We were both lucky in the strangest, most heartbreaking way possible. Lucky to have found each other when we both needed saving. Lucky to have discovered that sometimes the most broken souls fit together perfectly. When I was finally able to bring Benny home 3 days later, he was a different dog than the one I had rushed to the emergency clinic. He was thinner again, and moved even more carefully than before, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. A determination that matched my own, a quiet strength that spoke of battles fought and won. We settled into a new routine, one built around acceptance of our limitations and celebration of our small victories. Benny needed to eat 6 small meals a day instead of 3 larger ones. His walks were shorter, but more frequent. His medications were given with treats and gentle praise, turning necessary medical care into moments of connection rather than stress. And slowly, gradually, both of us began to heal in ways that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with love. Benny's progress was measured in tiny increments that felt like enormous victories. The first time he played with one of his toys for more than a few minutes. The first morning he woke up before me, tail wagging, ready for breakfast and whatever the day might bring. The first time he barked, a small, squeaky sound that made me laugh until I cried with relief and joy. My own progress was less linear, but equally meaningful. Chemotherapy continued to be brutal, and some days I wondered if the treatment was worse than the disease. But having Benny to care for gave me purpose beyond my own survival. On the mornings when depression made getting out of bed feel impossible, he needed breakfast. On the evenings when despair threatened to overwhelm me completely, he needed his medications and his bedtime routine. More than that, Benny taught me how to live in the present moment in a way that all my meditation apps and self-help books had failed to achieve. Dogs don't worry about tomorrow or regret yesterday. They find joy in the simple fact of being alive right now, in this moment, with the people they love. Watching Benny slowly return to health gave me hope for my own recovery in ways that medical statistics and prognosis discussions never could. If this tiny, broken puppy could fight his way back to joy and energy and trust, maybe I could too. Maybe healing wasn't about returning to who we were before, but about becoming who we were meant to be all along. The turning point came during our 6th week together. I had just finished my most difficult round of chemotherapy yet, and I was lying on the couch feeling sorry for myself and wondering if I had the strength to continue treatment. The side effects seemed to be getting worse rather than better, and I was beginning to question whether the battle was worth fighting. Benny was curled up beside me, as he always was on my bad days, his warm weight against my leg a constant comfort. Suddenly, he sat up and looked directly at me, his head tilted in that way dogs do when they're trying to understand something important about their humans. Then, without any prompting or coaxing, he climbed carefully onto my chest and pressed his face against my neck. It wasn't the first time he had shown me affection, but this was different. This was deliberate, intentional comfort. He stayed there for nearly an hour, his steady breathing and warm presence anchoring me to the moment and reminding me that I wasn't fighting this battle alone. When he finally moved, settling back down beside me with a contented sigh, I realized something fundamental had shifted inside me. The despair that had been threatening to swallow me whole had receded, replaced by a quiet determination that felt sustainable in a way that forced optimism never had. We were going to be okay. Both of us. Not because our illnesses would magically disappear, but because we had found something worth fighting for in each other. As spring arrived in Denver, bringing warmer weather and longer days, both Benny and I began to show signs of real improvement. His weight had stabilized at a healthy level for his size, and his digestive issues were well controlled with diet and medication. His coat had grown in thick and shiny, revealing beautiful markings that had been hidden by malnutrition and stress. Most importantly, his eyes had lost that ancient sadness and were bright with intelligence and the kind of trust that comes only after being consistently cared for by someone who keeps their promises. My own progress was more complex, but equally encouraging. The tumors were responding to treatment better than anyone had dared to hope. I was still weak and often nauseous, but my energy levels were more stable, and I was able to enjoy longer periods of feeling relatively normal. My medical team was cautiously optimistic, using words like encouraging response and sustained remission instead of the grim statistics that had dominated our early conversations. Dr. Martinez even mentioned the possibility of reducing my treatment schedule if my next set of scans continued to show improvement. But beyond the medical improvements, something more fundamental had changed in both of us. We had learned to hope again, Benny in the basic goodness of humans, and me in the possibility of a future that extended beyond mere survival. Our daily routines had become sacred rituals that structured both our days and our healing. Morning medications for both of us, administered with plenty of praise and treats. Breakfast together. Benny eating his specialized food while I managed whatever I could keep down that day. A gentle walk around the neighborhood, with Benny investigating every interesting smell while I breathed fresh air and reminded myself that the world was bigger than hospitals and treatment rooms. The neighborhood had begun to take notice of us as well. Benny was impossible to ignore. A medium-sized dog with gorgeous markings and enormous eyes, and a gentle demeanor that drew people to him like a magnet. Children would ask to pet him during our walks, and he seemed to instinctively know how to be calm and gentle with small hands and excited voices. Mrs. Patterson from the apartment upstairs started bringing Benny homemade dog treats. Marcus, the mail carrier, always had a pat and a kind word for both of us. Even Mr. Johnson, the building's notoriously grumpy superintendent, was spotted slipping Benny pieces of his lunch when he thought no one was looking. It was as if Benny's presence had created a small community of care around us. People who might not have otherwise connected, finding common ground in their affection for a dog who had already overcome so much. These casual interactions reminded me that healing happens not just in isolation, but in connection with others who choose to care. One afternoon in late spring, as Benny and I were returning from a longer walk than usual, Mrs. Chun was waiting for us in the lobby with an expression I couldn't quite read. "There's someone here to see you," she said, gesturing toward the seating area near the mailboxes. "She says she's from the animal shelter where you adopted Benny." My heart skipped a beat. Had I done something wrong? Was there a problem with the adoption paperwork? Had someone come forward claiming to be Benny's original owner? But when I saw the woman waiting for us, I recognized her immediately. It was Linda, the volunteer who had first introduced me to Benny and guided us through the adoption process. She was smiling, but there were tears in her eyes as she watched Benny trot confidently into the lobby. "Oh my goodness," she breathed, kneeling down as Benny approached her with a wagging tail and bright eyes. "Look at you, sweet boy. Just look at you." Benny remembered her too, greeting her with the enthusiasm he reserved for his favorite people. But then he returned to my side, sitting down and leaning against my leg in a gesture that clearly communicated where his loyalty lay. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by unannounced," Linda said as she stood up, wiping away tears that were clearly happy ones. "I was in the neighborhood, and I just had to see how you two were doing. The transformation it's incredible." She pulled out her phone and showed me photos she had taken of Benny on the day I adopted him. Thin, listless, with dull eyes and sparse fur. Comparing those images to the healthy, confident dog, now sitting beside me, felt like looking at before and after pictures of a miracle. "You know," Linda continued, "we see a lot of adoptions at the shelter. Happy endings, sad ones, and everything in between. But what you've done with Benny, this is special. This is the kind of story that reminds us why we do this work." She paused, studying both of us with the practiced eye of someone who had seen many animals and humans navigate the complex process of healing together. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said gently. "When you first came to the shelter, you looked like you were fighting your own battles. I wondered, I hoped, that maybe taking care of Benny might help you too." I felt tears starting in my own eyes as I realized she had seen something that day that I hadn't even fully understood myself. She had recognized two souls who needed each other, and she had trusted that love would find a way to heal what seemed broken beyond repair. "He saved my life," I said simply. "I thought I was rescuing him, but really, we rescued each other." That evening, as Benny and I settled into our usual spot on the couch for our evening routine of medications and quiet companionship, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed since that first day at the shelter. The woman who had walked in looking for a cat to keep her company during what she thought might be her final months had become someone who woke up each morning with purpose and hope. Yes, I was still fighting cancer. Yes, There were still difficult days and uncertain prognoses and medical appointments that structured my weeks. But I was no longer defined by my illness, and I was no longer facing that fight alone. Benny had taught me that healing is not a destination but a journey, an ongoing process of choosing love over fear, hope over despair, connection over isolation. Every day brought new opportunities to practice these choices, new chances to extend the same grace to ourselves and others that had been extended to us during our darkest hours. As I watched Benny doze peacefully beside me, his breathing steady and deep, his body completely relaxed in the way that spoke of absolute trust and contentment, I thought about all the people who had told me I was crazy to adopt a sick puppy when I was fighting my own battle with illness. They had meant well, these friends and family members who worried that caring for Benny would drain energy I needed for my own recovery. But they had it completely backwards. Caring for Benny hadn't drained my energy. It had given me energy I didn't know I still possessed. It had reminded me that I was more than just a cancer patient, that I still had something valuable to offer the world. In nursing Benny back to health, I had rediscovered my own strength and resilience. In learning to hope for his recovery, I had learned to hope for my own. In loving him through his worst days, I had learned to love myself through mine. Looking back now, I can see that the day I walked into that animal shelter wasn't the beginning of the end of my story, as I had thought at the time. It was the day everything changed for the better. It was the day I stopped seeing myself as a victim of circumstances beyond my control and started seeing myself as someone who could make a difference, even in small ways, even while fighting my own battles. Benny and I have been together for over a year now, and our journey continues. There are still medical appointments and medications and days when we both feel tired and fragile. But there are also long walks in the park and lazy Sunday mornings and the simple joy of two souls who have found their home in each other. People often ask me if I think Benny knows that I saved his life. But the truth is more complicated and more beautiful than that simple narrative suggests. Yes, I provided him with medical care and a loving home when he needed it most. But Benny saved my life too, in ways that are harder to quantify but no less real. He gave me reason to keep fighting when fighting felt impossible. He taught me how to find joy in small moments when joy seemed to have disappeared from the world entirely. He showed me that healing is possible even when the damage seems insurmountable, and that love really can bloom in the most unlikely circumstances. Most importantly, Benny taught me that rescue is rarely a one-way street. The animals we save inevitably save us back, often in ways we never expected, and always in ways we desperately needed. As I write this, Benny is curled up beside me in the sunny spot by the window that has become his favorite place in our small apartment. Occasionally, he lifts his head to make sure I'm still here, still part of his world, still the person who chose him when no one else would. His presence is a constant reminder that miracles don't always look like sudden, dramatic transformations. Sometimes they look like two broken souls finding each other at exactly the right moment and deciding to heal together, one day at a time, one small victory at a time. Sometimes they look like a dying woman and a dying puppy choosing love over fear, hope over despair, and discovering that together they are infinitely stronger than anything life can throw at them. The future is still uncertain for both of us. Cancer doesn't offer guarantees, and Benny's digestive issues will require lifelong management. But we face that uncertainty together now, and that makes all the difference in the world. We have learned that tomorrow's troubles are tomorrow's problems, and today's blessings are today's gifts to be treasured and celebrated. When people ask me what I've learned from this experience, I tell them that the most profound healing often happens not when we focus solely on ourselves, but when we find someone smaller and more vulnerable to care for. When we step outside our own pain to ease someone else's suffering, we discover reserves of strength and compassion we didn't know we possessed. Benny and I found each other at the moment when we were both at our lowest points, when hope seemed like a luxury neither of us could afford. But love has a way of creating hope where none existed before. And healing has a way of multiplying when it's shared between two souls who refuse to give up on each other. We are living proof that rescue comes in many forms, that healing is possible even in the most challenging circumstances, and that sometimes the most beautiful friendships are born from the deepest pain. We are testament to the power of choosing compassion over comfort, love over safety, and hope over the very reasonable fear that caring too much will only lead to more heartbreak. Every morning when Benny greets me with his tail wagging and his eyes bright with affection and absolute trust, I am reminded that the best things in life often come disguised as the hardest things. Sometimes getting exactly what we need requires being brave enough to give exactly what someone else needs first. In saving Benny, I saved myself. In healing Benny, I found my own healing. In loving Benny through his darkest days, I remembered how to love my own life again, even with all its imperfections and uncertainties and the ongoing reality of living with chronic illness. This is our story, a story of two souls who found each other when finding anything good seemed impossible, who chose each other when choosing felt like the hardest thing in the world, and who discovered together that love really is the most powerful medicine of all. As the sun sets on another day of our shared journey, Benny stretches and yawns, then settles back down with his head resting trustingly on my hand. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and new opportunities, new moments of fear, and new reasons for hope. But tonight, in this quiet moment, I find all the peace and healing I will ever need. We have tomorrow, and we have each other, and sometimes that is more than enough. Sometimes that is everything we need to keep believing that miracles happen every day, in the smallest gestures and the quietest moments, in the choice to love something more than we fear losing it. Sometimes salvation comes on four legs with a wagging tail and eyes that see straight into your soul and choose to love what they find there, broken pieces and all.